Okay, so welcome everybody to our presentation from Lauren Tucker from Special Education. She's going to take us through a journey on how we can integrate universal design for learning in online courses. Thank you, Lauren, and please take it away.
Fabulous. Thank you, Bo. Thank you everyone for joining us on a beautiful Friday morning. So I appreciate all of your time. This is part of the series for Office of Online Learning on building your online toolkit. So I'm excited to contribute to that. So I'm hoping at the end of today, you've got some good and helpful strategies that you can integrate within your online classes that are focusing on universal design for learning. I'm going to put the link to the notes in the chat one more time for everyone else who joined us. And so there's a bunch of links and resources on the slide presentation. So please feel free to make a copy for yourselves. But for those of you who don't know me, I think almost everybody knows me in the crowd, but I'm Lauren Tucker. I'm an assistant professor in the special ed department. This is my third full-time year here at Southern. I've been an adjunct for a while here, so I'm really excited to continue doing this work and working with Office of Online Learning. So thank you all again for coming. There we go. So here's our session goals for today. I'm hoping to kind of loop back and make sure that we've met these goals. But just looking at, first of all, identifying the crucial components of universal design for learning, essential for higher education. And I think right now we're in a unique time in higher ed. And so using universal design for learning, I found, especially with my online classes, has made a big difference. My frame, which I will share some of my survey results from my students, I largely teach graduate students. Current practicing teachers who are experiencing a very unique time in the field of education. And I do have some undergraduate students as well. So when I'm sharing my experiences, I've got a mix of both when it comes to that. So I will, again, I've got some data that I'll share that is a combination of both. So we'll analyze UDL resources and templates. I've compiled a website for everyone to start off your online teaching toolkit that you can save, and please feel free to use anything that I'm sharing with you today. I've saved some templates, some sample statements from a syllabi that I've created. So I hope all of this kind of helps you as you're building your toolkit. And then finally, my goal is that to give everyone some time to just discuss and share some resources. So at the end, we'll do that. We'll review resources on the website and brainstorm next steps. All right, so the first thing I just wanted to highlight, so for some of you, I know this is probably a review, but for anyone else, if you are not familiar with the UDL framework, this is the expanded UDL framework. They updated it in, I think it's 2018 now. It feels like eons ago, where they really expanded it and provided even more aspects of universal design for learning. And I highlighted in green the multiple means of engagement. And I find, especially now since the pandemic, this is the area where I am constantly needing support and looking to the UDL framework to help in my online classes, specifically with student engagement. This semester, I teach a 7:40 to 10:10 online class. So making sure that everyone is awake and engaged can be really challenging at that time of night. And so I find that a lot of my resources, I'm going to focus on multiple means of engagement, because that tends to be the space where I live in the UDL framework. I will also share resources. So providing multiple means of engagement is really the big one that I'm going to focus on today. But I'll also share some resources for you on multiple means of representation. So how are we sharing our content with our students so that they can access it in the most meaningful way? And finally, the third component is multiple means of action and expression. So is there flexibility? Are there options for our students to express their learning? And again, I find in online classes, being creative yet manageable is the most important part of this. And that's something that I've really been working on, is putting systems in place so that providing UDL experiences for my students is meaningful for them and manageable for me. Sometimes I've done things that are very unmanageable for myself, and I reflect on it later and try and figure that out. So I'm hoping to share strategies to make it manageable for you based on my experiences. And what I love at the end of the framework here is they've got this statement. And it says the goal of universal design for learning is creating expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal directed. And one of the challenges that I experience with universal design is that it's often just associated with students with disabilities. It's constantly associated with accessibility, but it is so much more than that. And I'm hoping today, and kind of continually working to reverse that narrative. And I think this statement and the goal of universal design helps to do that. I think all of you would agree that creating expert learners or facilitating learning experiences where our students are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal directed is everyone's goal. And so the framework helps us to do that. And it doesn't need to only kind of be considered when we do have students with disabilities or around students and their accommodations. And so I just kind of, that's my soapbox that I'll start off with here at the beginning. So as I'm kind of starting off with my introduction, we have a pretty small group. So I don't know if we would just mind kind of, if everyone can put your name in the chat, you can put your preferred name in the chat, and then we'll just go around and quickly introduce ourselves and share what department you're in and maybe one goal that you have for today. So everybody just take a minute and put your preferred name in the chat if you can. If you would prefer to not unmute, you can also just share in the chat kind of what department you're in, whatever kind of preference you have. Perfect. And then we're going to go in the order of the chat. So we can start off at the top. Joan, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Hi, I'm Joan. I'm in the special ed department, and I'm looking for engagement, and since I work with pre-service teachers, also what I can share with them.
Thanks, Joan.
Great, so I guess I'm next. My name is Angela Buchari. I am a new adjunct professor in the Department of Curriculum and Learning. So my main job is pre-K 5. I'm a humanities coordinator for Wellington Public Schools. So just some ideas on how to reach the bigger kids and share some of my expertise as I'm working with a graduate program in reading and undergraduate for education.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Angela.
I can go as well. I'm Bo. I run the Center for Educational and Assistive Technology and co-run the Office of Online Learning with Trevor. I also teach in the special education department part-time, and I've taught in curriculum and learning as well. And I'm really a huge fan of universal design, and I completely agree with Lauren that it's not just accessibility. It has to extend far more than that and applies to all students. And right now I'm really interested in that engagement piece that Lauren highlighted.
Hi, I'm Libby. I'm from the nursing department, new to Southern as of this semester. As I mentioned earlier, I was I'm a UDL teaching fellow from Goodwin University, and I started this teaching fellowship a few months before the world shut down in a pandemic. So much of my all my projects and work within the fellowship involved online learning, even though I'm not traditionally an online teacher. And at the end of the first full semester of online learning, I had some students say this was the best class that they've ever had. So I knew that the UDL was working because it's hard to teach a 4-hour online class. we could.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you, Libby. Great to
Thank-
meet you.
Thanks for doing this.
Hi everyone, happy Friday. This is Olcay from Educational Leadership Department. I am also first early college faculty coordinator. So in my role, I only work with adult learners in our 6-year program, our doctoral program, and faculty coordinator, I work with the principal and counselors. I am trying to explore resources, strategies, to implement UDL in adult learning. And it's good to see you all. Thank you and offering this great learning opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Cudahy. Essentially, I work with faculty and working with assisting them with their Blackboard. And I'm hoping to learn some universal design so I can maybe advise them a little better and to go in this direction. Ever since I've known Bo, he's talked about it, and I think it's a terrific tool. So thank you for doing this.
Thank
And
you.
I hope I'll pass it on.
Right. Great.
Hi, Kim Lacey here from nursing. I actually piloted universal design probably 20 years ago or 17 years ago, right? I've been at Southern like 19 in some months. But with the project, yeah, scary, Bob, I know. But I piloted universal design with UConn. It was kind of like this project we were doing, back then. So have always had an interest in it. And I also have been, since I came to Southern, have been teaching online courses in our RN to BSM program. So I'm pretty confident about my skills, but I'm always looking for new ways to engage the students. We've just moved some of our graduate programs to online learning. So it's a different population for me. So anyway, long answer, but I'm just happy to be here and to see what's new and see what other ideas people have. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. So nice to meet you, Kim. Thank you. Mary, I don't know, it's totally, if you wanted to share what department you're in and unmute, you can. If not, I think everyone has taken an opportunity to introduce themselves if they would prefer. All right. Thank you all so much for sharing. I'm excited to start kind of also building a community, because I think that's something too that I find brainstorming, as Kim said, kind of learning about new strategies and resources. I think Joan probably gets sick of me here at the special ed department, always talking and asking for advice and ideas. And I'm really excited that we have this opportunity to all meet across our disciplines and be able to talk about UDL. So pretty much everyone here has a background. And so I'm going to go quickly through this to really get at the meat of the presentation. But as I mentioned and kind of started with my introduction, that universal design really does go beyond accessibility. And what they are, there's currently a working group right now to also add in diversity, equity, and inclusion into the universal design framework. And so there is a special interest group really looking at, what is the intersectionality between diversity and equity in universal design. And I believe, I'm sure everyone has seen this very popular image that looks at equality, equity, and justice. And what I truly believe, and I'm very passionate about, is that using universal design for learning within our classes provides justice. We're reducing the kind of systemic barriers that some of our students might be encountering so that we don't need to provide layers upon layers of support to provide equity. We're removing barriers from the beginning. And that's what I really truly love about universal design. And I do find, especially in an online class, adding some of these UDL routines that I'm going to refer to them this whole time does reduce some of my back end work when I have accommodations for students, because they're built in supports already. And I'm going to share a lot of experiences that I've had but I really just want to highlight, again, the intersectionality with UDL and equity and inclusion here. And this is my plug. I absolutely love this book. My disclaimer is that the audience for this book is K through 12, but Andratija Fitzgerald wrote this book, Anti-Racism and UDL, and I highly recommend this book for those of you, especially if you're teaching pre-service teachers or working with teachers in K-12. But I also argue that there are a lot of great strategies and framing of the universal design framework within this book that are very powerful. It's a very accessible. She has such a powerful writing style. It's very informal, but she really focuses on honoring our students and looking at what strengths they come to the table to our course with, and then how do we then provide them opportunities to demonstrate those strengths within our classes. And her whole kind of analogy throughout the book is that it's the highway to learning. So building expressways to learning and providing them exit ramps when they need to go off and provide additional support. But anytime you can, she has a bunch of webinars online for free as well, but I cannot kind of emphasize the power of this book, again, to really also look at how we can support some of our marginalized students who are coming into our classroom with possibly some negative experiences within the classroom and within learning, and how universal design can empower them. So I highly, again, it is a K-12 focused book, but it's fabulous. As I was kind of talking with another one of our colleagues in the special ed department, I quoted her because we were talking about universal design, and I think she did such a good job really kind of highlighting exactly the power of UDL. And I know there are some faculty members who can be skeptical in introducing this because the impression is that it could compromise some of our content, right? Providing some flexibility or multiple ways to express, that it can kind of lose rigor is sometimes kind of the assumption that is made. But I kind of love how she captured this. And so you can take a moment to read it, but it really focuses on that access so that they can engage with the content. So looking at equity across access and supporting their kind of cognitive ability to engage meaningfully with what we're presenting to them. So I appreciate her letting me include this. And so this is kind of the foundation as to where I'm coming from. So thank you all for kind of going through that with me. Starting off with the lessons from pandemic teaching. So I was teaching online before the pandemic. And I do believe that the growth that I felt from the pandemic was astronomical. I really found that I had a lot of clutter. I had a lot of extra stuff in my online classes that were really creating barriers for some of my students. And I found that UDL also helped me to refine my instructional routines. As I mentioned, I was spending like way too much time on some stuff. So having 3 kids at home and working from home during the pandemic really made me prioritize and say like, okay, Lauren, you can't do all this. You need to refine how you're teaching online. And I will say that really helped me provide consistency, routine, and stability for myself when teaching online. And that's been crucial now to kind of continue this on. In the special ed department, we are working towards increasing our online course offerings because that's really what our students are asking for. So it's not going away, I don't think, for any of us. And making sure that we're not then burning ourselves out in the process is so important. So now I'm gonna kind of break up my strategies and focus first on instructional design. And how kind of building my classes has helped me and also helped my student approach to my classes. And now please, if anyone kind of, as I'm sharing strategies, would like to ask a question or share a strategy, please feel free to unmute or write it in the chat, whatever comfort level you have. But so now I'm just going to transition into tools, strategies, and tips from my experiences in implementing UDL. And in the beginning of the pandemic, I remember Bo and Libby from school counseling was sharing kind of their own kind of Blackboard template that they had created. And Bo always kind of talks about this rule of 3. And so after kind of going through some training with Bo, and I really have found I used to have a tab on the left side of Blackboard for each week. So I had like 16 tabs on the left side of Blackboard with each week. And I have now switched it up where all of my courses look the same. So you can see here, I've got the same tabs for all of the courses that I teach. This is really helpful for me because when I have student questions, I always kind of know exactly where to point them, right? It's always in weekly content, or it's always in assignments. And so I find too, for a lot of my graduate students, once they learn my system, it becomes a lot easier when they're taking multiple classes with me, because my setup is the same in each class. So I find clear, accessible, and simple is very powerful in Blackboard. And so these are my kind of tabs that I have on the left-hand side. I would say that for some of my classes, I don't always have the email option here, but this is what I have all the time in my classes. And I find these tools are really important. For those of you who are kind of newer to Blackboard, just in case, some things that I've learned is that if you don't add the My Grades tool on the left-hand side, there can be difficult ways for students to access their grades. And like, I found that out and it was way hard realizing that my students weren't like monitoring their grades the way that I wanted them to. They really only have like a dashboard when they log into Blackboard with all of their classes if you don't add that tools tab. So it makes things a lot easier for them. The other thing is the calendar. So I demo this and I actually go through and show them at the beginning of every single class these 2 tools. I explain to them grades and I expect them to look at my comments. And then the calendar feature, if you add due dates on your assignments, they show up on the calendar. And for students who use Apple, so they use iCalendar, they can actually sync their calendar with their Apple calendar. For some students, that's great. For others, it's way too overwhelming. They're like, Tucker, absolutely not. But it's providing that option. So those are the 2 tools that I try and facilitate for them. And I highlight explicitly at the beginning of every course for them to use to monitor their own learning. And again, like I really discovered that like these, you had to manually add them within your courses, but I find now I go through them and it really helps them keep track of their assignments and monitor their grades in my online classes, which was one of my barriers. So the next portion I'm going to focus on is the accessible content. So I talked about kind of how it's organized within Blackboard, and now this is transitioning into providing accessible content. One of the first tool to add to your toolkit that I've created, and I didn't double check and update all of the links for this semester, so that will be my disclaimer, is that I link for all of my students at the beginning of class this learner options for access, and really highlight for them. And I try and start off my class with, you're going to engage with this learning in different ways. And like, that's okay. And this is my foundation, right? My expectation is that everyone's engaging in different ways. So they have access to these learner options. And I highlight the built-in accessibility features within any of the tools that they might be engaging with. So I have, Apple, iPhone, Android, and I realized that someone brought up the other day that I don't have Windows explicitly on here, revealing my bias. And so I added it, but I didn't link it on here. And so I'll make sure I update that for you because this is linked in a resource. But really kind of just giving them very simple. And my purpose here is I'm highlighting to them again that everyone's engaging with content in different ways, and that's the expectation. And so I'm really trying to embed UDL and variability right at the beginning, so that for any of my students who do have accommodations or who are experiencing difficulties, kind of just accept that like things are going to be different for everyone. And that's kind of one of my goals. So just kind of highlighting different things that they can utilize within the technology at their disposal. to help them express themselves. So this is a link for you. So this is linked on here. I also created a website, so it will be on there to start building your toolkit, and please feel free to share. So I really kind of try and highlight with that at the beginning of my classes, again, that learner variability. Bo in his Center for Educational and Assistive Technology does have access to Read and Write for Google. So that does provide text-to-speech support and lots of other reading and writing supports for students. And so I mentioned that, especially because I'm working with educators or service educators, but also having them think about how it could help them in their learning. I also talk about and disclose within my classes that I listen to audio all the time, and I demonstrate it throughout my classes. Is that, like, at least for me in my stage of my life, if I sit down and try and like read a research article at the end of the day, like I am drooling on that journal article within 5 minutes. Like there's no meaningful engagement with that. And so I listen to it. I tend to listen to things while I drive if I can, or listen to it while I'm just sitting, but I fall asleep very quickly if I'm reading academically. And so kind of talking about my variability also really helps with my students. So giving them some options and demonstrating that. One of the tips that I want to kind of share with you is that we often utilize research journals for many of our graduate students, or we're asking them to engage with peer-reviewed research articles, and some of them might not be accessible. So for some students who want to listen or need to listen, they might not be able to engage with that. And there's a beautiful workaround. So here I just want to demonstrate that. This PDF is terrible. So I'm giving you a pretty significant example here. This is a K-12 reading lesson, but you can see that this was scanned from a copy machine. So it's really bad, but I'm sure all of you, I tried to find a good research journal article, but I couldn't find one for today. I spent too much time on it. But you all have kind of are picturing, I'm sure, research journals in your head that look like this. And for some of our students, it can be really difficult to access. So I'm in Google Drive right now. And so here I just opened up that PDF so you can see, oh, I can highlight because I'd already done it. But over here, if I click on Open With, and if I click on Google Docs, what this does is it does something called optical character recognition, and it converts the picture of the text to actual text. Now, it's only as good as the text that you are trying to convert. So this text, oh, why is it messing with me here? Oh, it actually did much better. It's only as good as the text that you are actually working with. So you can see here, oops, it's actually not too bad. So it includes the picture at the top of what it converted. And then you can see down here, and like some of the words aren't perfect because it was a very bad copy. But now I can listen to it. I can manipulate it. If I'm a student who has difficulty with some visual challenges, I can increase the font if I want to. And so that's something that I kind of highlight and talk about, but it can be a very important accessibility feature for students when we have PDFs that are inaccessible. We have access as faculty members to Adobe Acrobat Pro, so we can make things accessible, but providing this workaround is really important. The other thing that I really love, and so you'll notice here on Zoom that we have the live transcript enabled. And so I always really try and make sure that I enable that live transcript on Zoom. For any of you who are teaching on Zoom, you can also enable closed captions on Microsoft Teams if you're teaching on Teams. Is anyone teaching on Blackboard Collaborate? No, okay, good. All right, great. I'm gonna assume we're all probably on. You can do it on WebEx as well. WebEx has closed captions, but what I love about the transcript is enabling the transcript. Then students can have the subtitles if you would like. So some of you might have the closed captions on as I'm sharing today. Well, what it also does is it creates a transcript file. So you'll have a recording at the end, but you'll also have a transcript. I find this can be really helpful for some students to go back through in a synchronous class and provide that kind of written transcript. So again, some of our kind of discussions that are sidebars will still be captured in the transcript, but it can be a very helpful accommodation tool. And I find kind of having the transcript or having the recording at the end of class alleviates a lot of extra work for me. If I have a student ask me a question, I say, ooh, we went over that in the second half of class. Go ahead and the recording's posted on Blackboard and it's always there. And so being able to have, and I have the transcript as well. I don't automatically post it, but it's available for students that can really help them process the information. And so that's what I like about the Zoom options that were not there before and are much better now. The Zoom live transcript. Does anyone else have any other strategies that you've used to convey content or any questions? Like, no, Lauren, it's Friday morning.
Well, that's very impressive that we have the live closed caption. I mean, we must, because I know on the book club I meet with, she tried to do that, but you got to have somebody typing it in.
Right.
Or you got to pay Zoom, I guess, right?
So they did update it. What was it? Was it last year? So that now you can have, it is
Wow.
free enabled transcripts. It's automated, so it's only as good as the quality of the audio. So knowing that it's not perfect.
Yeah, I would use it as a caveat, like don't rely on that if you have deaf, hard of hearing people on the Zoom call. You really need to get a live interpreter.
Yes.
Oh, really?
For fidelity of kind of conveying information, I will say that what is the Teams closed captions are, I find a little bit better when you are working with individuals with hearing difficulties, because Teams does show speakers. So it will distinguish, right? So when I'm talking, it'll say Lauren, and then when Joan talks, but on Zoom, they do not. So on Zoom, it is just kind of like a running text. So there are different things, but I agree with Joan that if you do have a student or an individual with hearing needs, kind of making sure that you have formal supports. But I find for processing content, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And I think these are great strategies. And also we can include accessible after the class. So I teach the stats.
Yeah.
So everyone understand this is great, but they easily forget. So I always record them, and they find it very helpful. So I think the recording our lesson, and sometimes they are busy life with the adult learners, they easily forget. So I think making them accessible, recording them is also very helpful.
Absolutely. I agree. And even like I said, I've got my 7:40 to 10:10. So I've got a couple of parents who are like, I'm going to go put my kids to bed. I'll be right back. And that's the reality of working with graduate students. And so because I record class, I'm like, okay. And our expectation is if you're missing any active participation, you then need to email me and make sure that you kind of send that to me, or you make up for the content that you've missed. So I do find that kind of providing those access points alleviates a lot of extra work on my part.
Wow.
So the next part that I want to highlight, and this is something that we do get a prompt on Blackboard to remind us, and this is more of an accessibility piece of it, but I find is really important, especially for us to kind of bring it to light for our students, is providing alt text. So alt text is the description of a picture that you might have on Blackboard. And so I have this here, and this is a screenshot that I took from Blackboard. And you can see next to this image that I added here, there's this little green, I don't know, odometer, I guess is the word. And so if it's green, it means that you added alt text. Great job. But if it's red, it means that you didn't add alt text, which then means that if you do have someone who is blind or with a visual impairment and they're using a screen reader, which reads what's on the screen because they cannot access it visually, there is no embedded description. So they're losing any contribution that content, that picture is providing for you. So I like that Blackboard provides that little indicator for us. And So really, so I wanted to provide that in Blackboard. The other way that you can check if you wanted to then check for the accessibility of something is if you right click on it and you choose the inspect feature. It might feel a little overwhelming, but you get this window of code that pulls up. But over here on the side, you can see, I know it's tiny, but it says alt, and you can see my alt text description. So it says image of a drawing of a face, student's name, Leah, and the number 6 referring to her age. And so I provided the description of what that is because I'm providing content for them about student data privacy here in Connecticut, and how kind of these 3 pieces are important to consider. And so I just kind of wanted to share that as we are moving towards accessible content, because you never know. So that is my accessibility piece that I will say, and we have kind of systems in place in Blackboard to monitor that. All right, back to my Blackboard design, and being able to make things clear and accessible. What I find is that I incorporate visual cues for my students. So generally the online classes that I teach, I have a combination of synchronous and asynchronous. I like the flexibility that it provides. So that is my experience, is that my classes are both synchronous and asynchronous. So I use visual cues, especially for my asynchronous classes, so that I'm not fielding a gazillion questions, because that's what was happening to me is whenever I had asynchronous nights, I was really answering a lot of questions about what to do, where to go, so on and so forth. So I've developed this system of visual cues, and you can see here, I always have a home symbol, which means that's the home page, the beginning of their work. And then I have an arrow, which means that there's more. So whenever they've reached the home, they're done, and it brings them back home. And whenever there's an arrow on a page, there's more to come, so that they know that they're not done. And this is consistent. So I added these cues. Every class has their own home symbol and arrow, but it's very consistent. So these 2 symbols provide them these visual cues. And what I also have here, like these little simple instructional design pieces, I find really help to make sure they know where they're going and what they're doing. Again, my audience is that I have teachers who are working pretty much all day in a very stressful environment where they're understaffed. And so coming into class, a lot of them are kind of at their cognitive peak by the time they get to me. So any way that I can reduce their cognitive load of what is Lauren want me to learn, instead of where is it on Blackboard, that's what I want to do. So if I can alleviate the stress of where is it, so that they can focus on what is she teaching us, that's what I want to do. And so that's what I found is kind of a lot of these little strategies don't take a lot for me to do, like changing the color of when we're asynchronous or synchronous, but it helps them because they know exactly where we're going and what we're doing. So here there's just like, again, each class, I just color code if it's synchronous or asynchronous, and I put it right there for them. So again, these visual cues I find can be really, really helpful. I also have a very predictable routine. This is crucial for me as the instructor, because I am a routine-based person. And when it comes to multiple means of engagement, right, I'm minimizing threats. They know exactly predictably when things are going to be due or when I'm going to communicate with them. And I'm really promoting expectations. I'm giving them the routine, I'm fulfilling it, and then they actually know what's expected from them. So I have a clear routine from day one. And again, that really helps me in the chaos of my life, making sure that I have kind of clear set things that I do for my classes. I do a weekly course plan sent through Blackboard. And I share class notes the day before class or the day of class. So they always kind of know exactly what class is going to be like. And I find sharing the class notes gives some flexibility. I had some students who would print them out, but they always kind of have the notes, which I find can be helpful. But you can see here, I kind of cited some aspects of UDL, helps them manage information and resources. So if there's any notes that I need for them, it's kind of a very clear and consistent. So I'm telling you all this stuff, but how do I know that it actually helps? So I'm giving you a sneak peek on some research that I'm doing on the impacts of UDL kind of course design on my students. So here's kind of some preliminary data. My population is 64, so I've sent my survey to 64 students, and I have 31 responses. So I'm going to share kind of the results from 31 students. And I focused a lot on asking them about like, how does this help? Does this work? So my first one is that Blackboard organization. So that left toolbar, which I showed everyone with those very kind of 3 distinct things. And I just asked, how beneficial is it to your learning? So you can see on a Likert scale from 1 to 5. So I had 22 students where they felt it was significantly beneficial. And so these tiny pieces, for me, it just gives me some validation that it's helping. And for some students where they say that it wasn't beneficial, so I had like, not really, I had 1 student, like that's okay. But for the majority of them, it was beneficial. I also asked about organizing work into steps and tasks, which I'll provide an example of in just a moment. And you can see here, I had 1 where it was neutral, but everybody else found it beneficial or significantly beneficial. And again, this sample is graduate and undergraduate students, reflecting on kind of the impact of the instructional design. And so here, one of my routines to help with engagement, because that's something that I find like throughout the day, students sometimes would forget to sign into class or not realize class started, is I have a consistent communication recipe. And every day of class, so I teach on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, my students get a message from me reminding them of how we're meeting. I do a personal message, so I'm a big meme person. So I do some sort of a funny meme. I remind them of class. I put links to class notes if it's applicable, the learning goals, and then the tasks for the week. And I'm going to give an example there. And again, for a lot of my graduate students, I'm trying to minimize threats and promote expectations. So here, this is what we're going on. For some of my undergraduate students, it helps them to realize like, oh, she is going to ask us about the reading tonight, making sure that they're actually doing the reading before class. So here's an example of one of my communications that I just sent out last week for my graduate class that is online. So here you can see my little meme where we're talking about reading remediation. So I have my steps for their online asynchronous class. And what I do as well is I do a quick overview video. So it's usually about 3 minutes long, and I'm just demonstrating on Blackboard where everything is and what their expectations are. And so for example here, so I posted on YouTube and I track the views. I have 25 students in the class and my video right now has 30 views. So I just posted it. So that's telling me I did have students probably watch it multiple times, but this is giving me some feedback of like a big group of them probably appreciated this video overview, and then it lets them watch it over and over again. So this video took me 3 minutes to record, but it probably alleviated 10 to 15 emails I could have gotten that was like, Lauren, where's this? Lauren, what should I do? Lauren, how does that work? So I will say my return on investment for these things is huge, and it really helps with their engagement and motivation because I've given them the space to go and the supports already, so they don't have to ask for them. I teach a technology class, and so I do have quite a few students who are technology scared. So they're scared about exploring things, scared about Blackboard. And I find that this kind of helps me overcome some of that because I've got these built-in supports. And it helps me because I've got a routine and I'm not getting a gazillion emails, which, as we all know, the number of emails here at Southern can be a lot. And so this, I've found this routine that I have in place, really inspired by UDL, helps me tremendously so that my students understand expectations and follow through with what they need to get done. So that, does anyone have any questions so far? I feel like I'm talking I know, hopefully everyone's just kind of multitasking in the back on this Friday, which is good. So my next step that I shared that survey about the tasks and the steps. And one of the parts when it comes to multiple means of engagement that I find was really challenging is that if my students didn't know where to start on an assignment or on an asynchronous class, that I often had disengagement. So they wouldn't complete the work or they asked a lot of questions. And so in special education, we have something called task analysis, which is breaking down specific components of a task. And I've incorporated that into my online classes, and I present it to them as if it's their checklist. So this is your checklist as to what you need to do for our online class, print it out, but check off each line. So each step that you follow is what you need to complete for class. And then that's it. So I organize everything. I generally don't have more than 3 steps within a particular online class so that I keep things kind of chunked for them. So this is kind of my home page that I mentioned with my visual cues, have our learning goals. I provide a recording, and then there's steps for completion. So what do they have to do? So here's an example. This was my steps that I gave them for their online class last week or 2 weeks ago. So you can see they only had 2 steps for their online class, and they have to review the content, and they completed a test. And so I really tell them, this is your checklist. And so this makes sure that you have everything done. And again, like this really is very powerful for multiple means of engagement. And it's pretty quick for me to do. And it really helps them make sure they have it all done and eliminates a lot of emails and questions. It makes it a lot more palatable as well for my students so they know exactly what they need to do in an asynchronous class. So continuing on with my promoting engagement kind of theme, I demonstrated this at the beginning of our session today, and I find it's huge. Introducing students at the beginning of class can be super overwhelming. So that kind of put your preferred name in the chat and go in that order. I really like it's a very simple strategy, but it eliminates that kind of, who's going to go or unmuting or that kind of awkwardness, but it also helps with preferred names. And so I find that that's something that's really important, whether you have nicknames, preferred pronouns. So I love that strategy, even if I'm asking for participation. If you'd like to share, I'll ask, put your names in the chat and we'll go in the order of that. But putting and asking for preferred name in the chat at the beginning of class really does kind of help engage with a safe community and kind of honoring, preference of pronouns or names as students are engaging and being welcomed into your online community. Because instead of
Can I add something? Here?
Absolutely.
Starting for this, I teach online stats for this semester. I start every class now with the weekly highlight, personal,
Yes.
family, professional, any highlights for this week. Like I learned one student get the new baby. I get news from, they got a birthday, so they have kids get a college scholarship. So I think little personal highlights before we start, like couple minutes, it's create the positive climate and culture. So I learned a lot about this quick highlights.
Yes, huge. And I think that, oftentimes in online, we have to purposefully, promote some of that community building, as we were talking about before we started, that awkward silence at the beginning. If anybody logs in a couple minutes before class starts, how can you ask questions? And that's where I think my students now are just used to me babbling and being like, someone tell me something. And so now they kind of will come and have something to share at least, because they know that I'm going to be rambling on and on. So that is so important. And
I share some personal stories or highlights. So they said we are also human, like we have a family, we have a life. So it helps to connect. Now I see the big difference, like students, they share in the first week, one share, like now every week students sharing more personal highlights regarding their week.
Absolutely. I think showing that vulnerability, right? That like we are human and we are dealing with very similar issues is so important, right? Kind of helping with that engagement and fostering the communication. So here are some other, that's kind of engagement at the beginning. And then here are some other resources for engagement like during a synchronous class. So Nearpod and Pear Deck, I don't know how many, I'm sure some of you are familiar with these tools, but they are kind of interactive. They embed interactivity within your slideshows. Pear Deck, I find, you know, for those of you who are working with pre-service teachers is good to model for people who are going to be teachers, but Nearpod is nice for interactivity within a particular presentation. I think sometimes they're more of like an in-person sort of a support, but I do like them for online classes. What I've been using a lot more is Slido. I'm probably not even saying it right. But Slido is you can embed interactive, you know, responses within your presentation. So I use Google Slides and I can embed it where students kind of respond. And it's something a little bit different from the chat, but it will create a word cloud. You can do multiple choice questions. I have the free one, so I can only do a couple of questions within each presentation, but I really like it as just kind of something a little bit different. Screencastify is what I use to record my videos. And they just added a new feature last year where you can embed questions with your recording and then share it with students. So I've been toying around with that. If I kind of provide instructions on a video, I can ask them a question within it to make sure that they've been watching it. But I haven't used that feature yet, but it's something that they just added. Edpuzzle, I know Oljay uses this one all the time. He is the Edpuzzle expert. But Edpuzzle allows you to embed questions within YouTube videos. And so that one is another one for an online class. If you have, you know, pre-created YouTube videos, you can embed multiple choice questions, open-ended. Oljay, please feel free to elaborate because I know you use this way more than I do.
Yeah, again, for the Edpuzzle, what I did now, I created all the modules with it. There's a teaching integrated, there's a questions integrated. You can include all the YouTube available videos. So now I have around like 50 modules and it is ready to implement. Now, when I work with, especially with the high school remote instruction, I just share with the modules. When they complete, they got the certificate, they got the badges. Like this is a huge help. Instead of teaching the same thing over and over again, instruction there, assessment is there. You can measure them. It is just with one click, you make it available and you can track their progress. So this is again another Edpuzzle is my favorite one, and I strongly recommend.
There we go. See, any questions about Edpuzzle? Oljay's your man. And then I also I use Flipgrid. This is where I will share one. I was like Flipgrid crazy at the beginning of Flipgrid, and I've learned my lesson very quickly. Is that I assigned it too much at the beginning, and when you have a large class of 25 students and you ask them to record 5-minute videos, whew, do that math, it takes way longer to watch a video than it does to read a reflection. So I learned my lesson. And so now I really pick judiciously when I incorporate Flipgrid within my classes, so that kind of maybe they don't need as much feedback, or it's a reflection piece where they can reflect and bounce ideas off each other. And I'm just grading it for completion. Don't make the same mistake that I did, because I was in like a grading mess for a little while because I incorporated Flipgrid a little bit too much. What I do though is I provide Flipgrid as an option for my students. I do kind of, they have to submit their notes for asynchronous classes. So I do allow them, if they want to use Flipgrid to submit their notes, they can, but they don't have to. And so I give it as an option. And I had one student who consistently used it all the time and just recorded herself talking instead of typing it. But that's like I've had one person take that choice. So it was an easy option to give. But I will say that, so if you use Flipgrid, or if you're interested in the video-based discussion board, just kind of think about how many students you have and the amount of time it might take to grade it. And now here's, I'd say, one of the biggest strategies when it comes to engagement in synchronous classes. So again, I'm teaching a 7:40 to 10:10 with 25 either teachers or paraprofessionals who have been working all day, and nobody's happy about logging in at 7:40 at night. And so I do a lot of breakout groups. I do a lot of interactivity because, you know, I'm teaching to a bunch of black boxes and I'm like, is anybody there? Like I'm nervous that some people might be sleeping. So I do a lot of interactivity and I start that off right away because I've learned my lesson. And what I found is that when I had breakout rooms, I felt like whack-a-mole, right? I'm like trying to get into as many breakout rooms as I can. And if I have 5, like I just wasn't making it to every breakout room. And then I would find that like I didn't even see this person talk, right? So I was really struggling with monitoring student participation in breakout groups. And so I didn't read this book, but I found the resources online. There's a book called Teaching Effectively with Zoom. And again, I didn't buy the book. I didn't read it, but I
Read it, but I bought
You
it.
read it. Oh, Joan bought it.
Haven't read it yet though.
Oh, okay. Joan bought it. So Joan bought it. But so the big thing for me was he provides this system for breakout groups. And I use Google Slides, but you can really use any shared platform. And I'll kind of demonstrate it. I have it within our presentation today. And we'll maybe do a breakout group. But so I use a shared platform. So my students have editing rights to my presentation. I set their expectations very clear. You have 10 minutes and they always have something to do. So they're going to write about something, they're going to reflect, they have to document the conversation. I provide them a template, like I said, on Google Slides. And what I can do, which I love, is that I then just sit in the main room and I watch their progress on Google Slides. So then, you know, I give it a couple of minutes. And if I'm finding like, ooh, breakout room number 3, they're not writing anything, I can then pop into that breakout group and promote conversation, stimulate or facilitate the experience. It also then kind of just helps me manage the breakout rooms better. And then I have documentation of student learning. So we always kind of in a synchronous class, right? You have a couple of people where you're like, are you there? Or is your computer just open and you're like in the other room? So this also allows me to then monitor, right? If I have a couple of people where I'm questioning their participation, I can then hop into their breakout group and say, okay, Joan, like, tell me what you think. And it gives me kind of a smaller group to make sure that I have my students participating. And so that's where I find kind of this shared activity on a shared platform has like drastically improved my participation and my engagement in my online classes. And it kind of allows me to facilitate them a lot easier. And so I generally have, 2 to 3 breakout rooms a class. Again, I'm teaching at night, so I'm trying to keep them all awake. So I have, 2 to 3 breakout activities to keep them engaged, to build the community, as Olcay mentioned, because teaching online, they all don't really know each other. So I'm trying to kind of get them to share experiences, to make connections. But this system, I use it consistently, and it made a huge difference for me. I'm just going to show you quickly on here. Oh boy, I overplanned a little bit. But here's an example of the group activity instructions. So I generally kind of use this template and I just copy and paste it. So I will adjust this, but I give them their task. And then I always have breakout room number 1, and I have a template for each of their breakout groups. So here you can see whatever number that they're assigned to, they just write their names in and they document their notes. This really helps me too, because then if I have a student who missed, like if Trevor emails me and was like, I didn't make it to class, I say, okay, watch the recording and then send me your notes from breakout room activities. And so then they can just see the notes. Now they could just take what other people said, but at some point in time. But they send me their notes and I have kind of the active activities for them already built in. So it's, again, alleviating a lot of work on my part because I have the system set up in place already. So yeah, so this is kind of the breakout room. So we will get to that, but that's how it looks. And once I have them set up, I just copy and paste them into the other class and just adjust what my instructions are, my guiding questions. So it's a really kind of easy template or routine to set up for yourself. And once they know the routine, I'm like, are we clear on expectations? Yep. And they kind of know that I'm watching them using that kind of big brother piece, which Jess Gregory will talk about in another session, to really help their participation. Anyone have any questions or other breakout group strategies? All right. Drive on. I hope everyone's getting something from this, so we'll talk afterwards, but all right. The other perfect, thank you, Libby, for that positive reinforcement. Great, thanks, Trevor. So for asynchronous, what I also have found that can be really helpful is this like active note taking. So I struggle with, I'm not as good at Ed Puzzles. So it's overwhelming for me to think about embedding questions in every YouTube video that my students are watching. So what I've started using is I just ask them to take notes and they have to submit them. And so I find that strategy is very helpful and it alleviates some work for me. And what I say is that, all right, take your notes however you would like. And I provide the option of they can handwrite their notes, they can type their notes, they can record a video. So I have a blank Flipgrid available, or they can record audio. And I give them that option, whatever works best for you, just submit your notes. I want to know that you watched these videos. And I find that giving them that choice is really helpful. Not many students audio record. I think I've had like 3 in all of my classes, but they know that it's an option if they have a difficult time. I had one student a couple of semesters ago who had a concussion, and so she had a lot of difficult time typing on the computer, so she audio recorded. But what I do is I have a similar kind of visual cue system where anytime they see this little emoji with the sunglasses, that's a question that they have to write in their notes. And so they know when I write something down or I give them a question, anytime there's a little emoji, they need to write it and submit it. I will also increase the question and bold it, kind of give them as many visual indicators to say, you need to write this question in your notes. And it is a really nice way, some students are very verbose, some aren't, but kind of giving that flexibility just allows me to see that they actually engaged with the content. So this allowing options, this is something that I find, especially since the pandemic, right? Feeling that lack of control for many of our students, not knowing what's going to come next. I think we're still dealing with a lot of that, and having some ownership within their courses and being empowered to make a choice is a huge component of UDL, and really important, I find, in online learning for us to consider. And so I always, within each week, within each class, I try and think to myself, like, what are they picking? What's their choice within this class, to make sure they have some sort of choice within each class. Sometimes it's just you can handwrite or type your notes and that's their choice. But other times, it's pick this or that website. And so integrating some sort of student choice really helps with that motivation and engagement, because they understand that I'm honoring kind of their learning experiences and really want to make sure that it's something that is applicable to them, and really helps with empowerment. So this is something here. So I had my students reflect on learner choices within the class, and you can see, so I had 71% stated that it was significantly beneficial for them within the course. Another 5 said it was like somewhat helpful, and then 4 were ambivalent. So they were just neutral. So it's not hurting anybody if I'm providing a choice, but you can see that it's significantly benefiting a good amount of them. And that's what I find for UDL, is that generally it's not hurting anyone. You're only helping. And especially for me, I'm finding that they're also helping me in my workload and anything else that I'm doing. So my other ones, these are kind of instructional tips that I found that help me in, again, kind of managing the online classes. This is another Blackboard thing that I feel like I learned too late in my life. So just in case anybody doesn't know this, when you have a discussion board, you can subscribe to it so that you get an email when students post. I'm sure everyone's been in a situation where you're like, here's a discussion board where you can post questions, and then like, who's randomly checking the discussion board? Nobody. And then at like all of a sudden you're at like week 5 and you're like, oh God, there were like 3 questions that I totally forgot about. That happened to me all the time. Because like, who needs something else to check on? So in Blackboard, you can subscribe to the discussion board and you get an email whenever anybody posts. Now, if you use discussion boards consistently in your online class where students are posting all the time, like, don't subscribe to that one because you're going to get a million emails. But if you do have one that's like the course questions discussion board, you can subscribe to it. And again, this like is something that made a big difference for me. And I also tell my students to do it as well, especially in our course ones. Subscribe to it. So then if someone else asks a question, you see it and you are engaging with it. So I tell them to subscribe to it too. But like, again, this is something where like, then I was like, I got to make sure I check the discussion board. It's like, no, work smarter, not harder. Subscribe to the discussion boards. This is going to seem a little crazy. So bear with me on this, but so especially if you're teaching kind of classes, you know, you're designing an online class, and especially if you're doing asynchronous and you might be teaching it a couple of times. What I found is that I've created spreadsheets of feedback for me so that I found myself kind of writing similar feedback or sharing connections in Blackboard. And then I was like, again, why am I retyping this over and over again? So what I've started doing is I have spreadsheets for each of my classes, and I copy and paste by week the comments that I'm putting in for my students. When I'm finding that I have some particularly hard content, I will also put my frequency so then I can know like, oh man, I redirected or I needed to reteach this content, you know, to half my class. I need to teach that again, or I need to post a video. So the frequency count, I really do when I need to kind of reteach something or I'm finding there's a theme. Go ahead, Bo, you had unmuted. Did you want to share something? No, are you sure? Okay. So this sounds a little nuts. So usually I'll kind of like write their name, but like it makes a big difference for me because oftentimes I will like share a connection like, oh, like Libby, I also had that experience. And so I find, you know, when I'm having students reflect, I might then say, share a connection that I have based on the assignment. And I might share it multiple times. So like, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So I'm going to work smarter. And so this is really helpful because then I also, it helps me to look back and say like, all right, where was I last semester? What sort of feedback did I give last semester? And it also kind of helps me reflect on my students and where they are. So I keep a spreadsheet of my feedback. So I can, again, copy and paste or just kind of have a gauge as to like, wow, they didn't really get this content. I need to teach it again. So again, it can seem a little foo, but it's been really helpful for me and I can get through grading. Oh yes, email. That's a great idea, Rebecca. The email signatures for things that you email out a lot. I like that idea a lot. The other thing that I've written, and I know I've shared this previously, so some of you might have already seen this or had it, but I've created some online learning syllabus statements that I put on my syllabus to kind of help and just make sure that I'm clear and my students understand my expectations for certain things. And again, a lot of my classes, I teach technology classes, so I'm pushing them when it comes to technology. But these are just kind of some of the statements that I've already created. So I wanted to share with anyone if this is helpful for you, using some of the things that I kind of really highlight is my feedback. So I did find that, like, again, if you don't tell students where your feedback is, they might not actually be reading it. So some of my students, I found I was writing all this feedback and they didn't read it. So I explicitly tell them how to read it, which is really important. So you can see these are kind of all of my policies, but I have my online learning policies. I highlight kind of the importance of time management with asynchronous classes, professionalism. And then I also have kind of my video classes and kind of some of my classroom norms. So I don't require people to have their videos on. I highly recommend it, but I kind of honor, wherever anyone is. But I do say that kind of their participation is monitored. So I do check in on my students who I feel like are disengaged within class. And I do record every single class. So I talk about that in the syllabus. And they all know that, and it's only used within our class-based environment. So please feel free if any of this language is helpful to you or if it's beneficial. This is within the resources that I'm sharing. I didn't put this in the presentation, but I also have a self-care pass, and that is really great. That's another recommendation from Libby from school counseling. She gave me that idea and I've used it in every class since then, where it's like a homework pass. One step of an online class is dropped. They can skip it at any point in time throughout the semester. It is like super tiny, but I can't tell you how many students are like, thank you. Like, okay, sure. It's like a super tiny thing, but it really, students really appreciate it. But I also make them, you can see here, I ask them to email me that they're using their self-care pass and tell me what they did. So I try and get them to make a purposeful choice to take care of themselves. And similar to what Oljay said, I get some nice, like, I FaceTimed my godmother in Puerto Rico and I so it was it's a nice way to get to know your students, like I'm moving next week and I took this time to pack up the kitchen or something. But it just shows that, like, you care about where they are in life and you understand that they're adult learners and that, like, life happens. And so that's something that I have found, again, like these systems that I've put in place in my classes really help with my motivation to complete the work because they're more motivated, which is nice. Went a little bit over than I thought, but that's okay. So what I wanted to share is that almost everything I've shared today, I've created a website to start off your online learning toolkit. And I've compiled some things on here for you. And so here I have, I use something called a Wakelet to compile my bookmarks. I was someone where I just bookmarked everything on my Chrome browser and I had like pages upon pages of starred things that made no sense. Now I use something called a Wakelet, which makes a lot more sense, and you can share it. So I have Wakelets for my students that I share with them. And so here's one that I share with my students, just helping them, reminding them that there's tools that they can use to learn. So I've shared this with you. And then I also created, this is from the university forum, but I kind of compiled a bunch of resources about UDL and higher ed in the different areas of UDL. all sorts of, so some of them are examples from me, some of them are just kind of regular website examples to help you. But I put a bunch of stuff on here to help you in your online UDL endeavor. And then what I would love is I started this last semester, and you'll see it kind of looks a little bit sad, but I feel like we're going to have some great contributions today. But what I'm trying to do is build our UDL community, right? So kind of showing where UDL is being offered here and how people are using it here in the university. So there's a link to this Padlet, and anybody can add to it. So you can see, like last year, we had one person from the CMD department share how they're using UDL, but it's a really good example. So I know, especially Libby now from Goodwin, you probably use it all the time, and Kim. So I would love for you guys to share on this Padlet. I'll put a link in the chat for you too, to just share your UDL tools, strategies, experiences. Because again, I think we can be empowered by each other, and I love to just kind of continue growing it. So I'm trying, but this is available here. And so I think we can really learn from what each other is doing. And we're not going to do this breakout group. But yeah, so what are any thoughts, additions, questions?
So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you. Each time I listen and I learn different things, and my comment and my recommendation, you put lots of thinking experience on this modules. I strongly recommend this should be required course for faculty, should be badges, micro certificate for all Southern faculty staff who's interested. Or I think we are so lucky to have you, and this might be open for the K through 12 principals, counselors, the teachers. Like, you have been working on this for years and years of experience. You have education and all this great resources. I think, and I recommend as an educator, like this is priceless. And especially with after COVID, everyone is using the digital tools, but there are still lots of need for improvement for the higher education, also K through 12. I hope you develop the modules so everyone can get the UDL badges from Southern.
Right, I know. Get those micro badges
this should
going.
be next level. So that's like having all these resources in 1 hour, 20 minutes. You zip them and give them as with the golden plate. I think this is very helpful. Thank you being resourceful. I hope you develop the digital badges to get the UDL.
Yeah, thank you, LJ. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the comments in the chat. I appreciate it. So all of these are available for you. So the recording will be online. Can you email the links within this chat to us? Yes. So I can make, I think maybe Bo, if you, I don't know if you can send an afterwards email. Perfect.
Yeah, I'll send an email with everything.
And I'll make sure I also add the presentation on the website too, and then everything will kind of be in one space for you. And it would be great. So please feel free if you have like something that I can add to the website, but I'd love to kind of just continually build it so that we can share from each other, because there's so many things that we can learn.
Yeah. Lauren, we had a meeting this morning and found out that one of the students was upset because they weren't sending a notification for an exam, and I guess they missed it.
Yeah.
And I guess this universal design should help that, right? I mean, I like when I taught at Sacred Heart University biochemistry, I would never thought that a student wouldn't know if they were having an exam. So I guess it's a different world. So
Yeah.
But universal design, I think, would be really helpful for that.
Right. And I think too, it's depending on the students that you're working with, right? So I will say that like, Bo and I taught like oodles ago an FYE class where like you want them to be more accountable for their exams, right? So like you might provide the announcements at the beginning, but then scaffold them off because it's like, we want you to learn these skills, right? This class is helping you learn to be a responsible adult. But at least for me in a graduate school, like I know my teachers can do all of this. Like they do it all the time, but like I don't want to give them one more thing to manage. So if I can make things easier to, again, free up that cognitive load, to then I want you to actually learn this concept. I don't want you to worry about what mode we're working or meeting in tonight. So like, I know they have the skills. I don't need to teach it to them. They have it. I just want to make this easier. So I do also think it depends on the population that you're teaching, because we might need to teach our 18-year-olds and our 19-year-olds that like, no, you need to know that you have an exam. But I know that my graduate students have that skill. They just are using them in their day jobs. So I don't want them to have to apply it, because what I want them to apply is learning this new tool or learning this new strategy. And so that's kind of, for me, that like is where UDL comes in, is like where they're focusing their cognitive load.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
So I teach the same course over almost like 10 years, but each time the student profile, their individualized, personalized needs, interests, I have to make some change. So there's no one fits all, like even though it's the same class, but every year we are changing. So that's why I decided to make the mid-year need assessment or mid-year checkpoint. And so this is helping me balance, adjust my teaching curriculum and assessment. So I am wondering, when we ask them for the mid-year evaluation or mid-year checkpoint, what kind of questions we should ask them to make sure we are on the right path. So sometimes we design, it looks good for us, but
Right.
it's important to check with the student if they are agree with us. So now I had the idea for the mid-year evaluation. So what kind of questions or concepts we should ask in the mid-year checkpoint?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I do the same thing, OJ, especially so I kind of start with two simple questions, I guess is my kind of easy way. And so I am refining things where I updated one of my courses where I flipped it so that they get the content online, asynchronous. And then when they're on campus, it's a hybrid class, they're doing all project-based learning, but it's hard to figure out, like you said, because I have different levels of people. So I just ask them two questions after each activity. So like, what worked for you and what could be improved? And so like those are my two. And so, because I always want to know like, well, what worked, right? And like, what could be better? And sometimes it's like, well, I wish you had more free apps, or I wish, but at least with those two questions, I'm always sparking their ideas. And then, so those are, because it's simple, because I find if you ask them too many questions, right, then they don't even respond.
Yeah, I think nice and simple, what work and what needs to improve.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good, Rebecca had an important point about choice, right? It is that it can also be overwhelming. Absolutely. Work on something interesting. That's huge.
Yeah, we get those. Yeah, so something interesting to you, and they have no idea what to choose. Also, especially the early students, because they're coming from a much more structured situation, and the idea of choosing things for themselves is scary, because they're still thinking that there's a right choice.
Right. Yes.
And so, making that choice clear and not overwhelming.
I think the same thing. I was creating a rubric because we need rubrics, right? But I didn't want to limit their creativity by putting too much detail on the rubric. And that wasn't pleasing to everyone. They wanted the boxes,
Ugh.
you know, very much, I'm like, I'm not, if you want to do a PowerPoint, you can do a PowerPoint. If you want to make a video, you can make a video. I just want you to share the, you know, and they're like, yeah, I want to know how many slides in the PowerPoint.
yes.
and how many-" And so it can be, you're right, stressful, where I'm thinking I'm not limiting them. I'm giving them their choice to be, you know, expressing,
Right.
you know, so.
It is, that's balance. And that's right, because I do like explorations, right? And that was my goal, right? Is that like, here are your choices, like choose your journey, right? And the last year they were like, no, this cannot be open-ended. And so now I have two options. So I have like a free for all, choose your journey, whatever you want to do, but like, here's my expectations. And then I have a guided journey. So like, if you need the steps that you need to take, like here's your, but it took me, right? It took me 2 years to develop both of those paths. And now I have it and I can refine it. But it was from kind of asking them to reflect on like, what was this experience like? And it's funny, like my group of students that I had last year really wanted the guided journey, but the group I have now, they're like, no, let us go. Like just let it in it. So they're a totally different climate. And they just want to be open-ended. So it is kind of, but if you have that kind of backup plan, like you shared, Libby, and kind of ready and provide that openness, it can be so helpful. Hi, Kim. I noticed you.
Hi. Yeah, I unmuted. I was just going to say, one of the things that just kind of talking about that being overwhelmed and that whole thing is to do, not really telling students necessarily exactly what to do, but to provide process steps. So to approach this assignment, step 1, right? And then I'll put, you know, what it is. And then I might put in sort of some examples, like a quick, like how they could, you know, how they could do it. Or sources they might use. So, and I think that seems to be helpful because it kind of, sometimes when we give them assignments, it just, you know, as we said, seems very overwhelming. And especially if it's something that's, you know, a longer project or a longer type of paper, for example. So I find that to be useful.
That's great. I love it too, that task analysis, right? Of
Yeah.
the steps and providing the examples within the steps. Cause that's where I have like a love-hate relationship with examples, right? Cause sometimes then it's like all your stuff looks like the example. Like, no, right? I want you to, but if you provide this tiny example, you know, such as within each step, it kind of then gives them a little bit more freedom. So I love that suggestion, Kim. Thank you. Well, thank you all. So I'm sorry I didn't leave enough and like more space to talk and discuss. I apologize that I kind of kept going, but this was great.
Thank you so much, Lauren. This
Yeah,
was
thank you.